After Les Paul passed away, his children entered his vault and were shocked to see what was within. Within were valuable guitars, patents worth millions of dollars, and royalty checks that would not stop arriving. The magnitude of their riches was enough to make them cry. However, that was only the first step. The incredible tale of how a $5 contract became one of the largest fortunes in music, complete with family feuds and auctions that broke records. Lester William Pauls came into this world in Waukesha, Wisconsin on June 9, 1915. His maternal lineage traced back to Germany, and his mother Evelyn had ties to the Studebaker automakers and the Milwaukee beer sector. George, Lester's dad, had a garage, and the little boy would spend hours there gathering components. Because he was an imaginative child, even their wooden stairway became a laboratory for him to explore. To make them sound like an instrument, he cut the steps to alter their pitch. Despite her disapproval of the harm, his mother praised it as intelligent. Evelyn chose to abbreviate the Paul family name from Pauls to just Paul after his parents' divorce. She wished to ease the burden of the widespread anti-German attitude that pervaded the First World War. Although Lester never formally changed his name to Les Paul, he began using the moniker in his senior years. He began performing when he was just 5 years old, singing, "How you gonna keep him down on the farm?" He would stand on tables at Rotary Club meetings. His mother had been informed by a music teacher, "Your boy will never learn music," but he still persisted. When he was 8 years old, he disassembled a harmonica to learn its inner workings. He then taught himself to play it by putting it back together. His first radio was constructed by 9 o'clock. An antenna he erected between trees allowed it to absorb sound directly from the air, eliminating the need for electricity. At the age of 10, he had an idea for a harmonica holder that would allow him to play both the guitar and the harmonica without using his hands. After bending a wire coat hanger and adding some scrap wood, he fine-tuned it until it was functional. His sibling was a dry cleaner, and he would often bring home spare hangers from work. By iteratively testing and refining, Les transformed them into prototypes that would never stop. The 1925 drive-in incident, where an audience member yelled out, "Red, your guitar's not loud enough," was the perfect catalyst for his artistic pursuits. He snatched the mouthpiece off his mom's old phone and attached it to a speaker for use with a radio. He raised his voice to a higher pitch by attaching the mouthpiece to a broomstick and yelling into it. However, it was insufficient. Connecting a phonograph needle to his guitar's bridge and the radio's amplifier, he proceeded to jam. Something about the raucous, feedback-heavy sound seemed effective. He had only just begun working on the electric guitar when he was 12 years old. Even when others didn't believe him, he persisted. At 13 years old, he was already performing at roadhouses under the moniker Red Hot. $5 a night was a substantial sum for him to make through music. With the alias Rhubarb Red, he performed country music on St. Louis radio when he was 15 years old. And with the identity Les Paul, he played jazz in Chicago nightclubs. In his never-ending quest for novelty, he would move between the two styles according on the audience. He quit school at 17 to embark on a tour. His musical career began with Ruberton's Texas Cowboys and continued with Sonny Joe Wolverton. Back at Beekman's Barbecue, his big break came when he played guitar for tips with a tin bucket at his side. He could afford to purchase additional radio components with the $14 he earned some nights. He always considered music and creativity to be inseparable. Rather, he regarded them as complementary. A lot of things started to fall into place once Paul relocated to Chicago in 1934. At the Chicago World's Fair, a gigantic event, he performed for an unprecedented audience. Simultaneously, he secured radio gigs that would determine his trajectory in life. It was music galore in Chicago, and Paul was smack dab in the thick of it. After teaming up with Sonny Joe Wolverton, he took over as host of WBBM in Chicago and WJN in Racine. At day, he was Rhubarb Red, entertaining Midwesterners in rural areas with his country music. At night, though, everything changed. He dove headfirst into jazz, where he learned to improvise and captivate an audience in a whole new way. His transitions from country to jazz were formative experiences that helped him become more than simply a guitarist. He met some of music's all-time greats during his tenure on the air and at Chicago's nightclubs. The pianist Art Tatum, whose deft touch made him look unnaturally fast, crossed his path. Tatum showed Paul a new way to think about music by introducing him to improvisation and complicated Lex chords. And then there was guitarist Django Reinhardt, who, despite losing 2 fingers in a fire, maintained an unparalleled level of talent. Rather than viewing it as a constraint, Reinhardt used it as inspiration to develop an entirely new musical style. It was an educational experience for everyone. Not only did he respect these artists, but he also performed with them. As he jammed with Chicago's top musicians night after night, he absorbed their styles and approaches, eventually incorporating them into his own. He had evolved into something more than a country player or jazz artist. What mattered most to him, though, was understanding innovation. He had learned from Tatum and Reinhardt that music was about more than simply playing well. It was also about pushing boundaries and accomplishing the seemingly unattainable. Paul demonstrated in 1953 how profoundly Reinhardt had affected him many years later. It shocked the music world when Reinhardt passed very suddenly at the age of 43. Paul quietly helped pay for Reinhardt's funeral, a gesture that few people ever knew about, but he never forgot what he had learnt from him or the impression he had made. Les Paul's first goal was to make his guitar sound louder. He never intended to revolutionize music. Performing in large halls was difficult in the 1930s. No amount of pickups would have helped an acoustic guitar survive in such a large room with a complete band. Everything he could think of was an attempt to cure things. In an effort to dampen the guitar's excessive vibrations, he tried stuffing it with ragwood and even plaster of Paris, but to no avail. The feedback persisted even as his guitar grew heavier. He reached rock bottom at a Wisconsin nightclub. In an effort to enhance the volume, he connected a phonograph needle to his guitar. Nothing more than a short-term solution. He realized he needed a permanent fix when he realized the instrument itself was the source of the problem, not the pickups or amplifiers. He began to perceive it clearly by the late 1930s. This entire instrument became an echo chamber of noise due to the guitar's hollow body, which amplified not just the song but also any and all vibrations. Eliminating the hollow body was the only way to achieve the goal of regulated pure sound. Something completely new was constructed by him in 1941. As its name implied, it was little more than a 4x4 piece of wood with a guitar neck and pickups fastened to it for aesthetic purposes. He dubbed it the log. He attached the sides of a vintage Epiphone hollow body using bolts, but they were only decorative. The guitar's strength lay in its solid wood core. Clean, unending sustain instead of feedback and annoying vibrations. Les Paul made a choice that would alter the course of music history in 1943 when he relocated to Los Angeles. In response to Bing Crosby's encouragement, Paul transformed the garage of his Hollywood house into a groundbreaking recording studio. It was more than simply a room full of gear. It was where he pioneered new sonic territory. He improvised a recording lathe out of a catalytic black flywheel and other equipment he fashioned himself. He yearned for an original idea, one that had never been heard before. For the subsequent 2 years, he toyed with various methods of sound layering, including overdubbing, sound-on-sound recording, and adjusting the tempo. With each new finding, he got closer to what he dubbed the new sound. Attracted by his experiments and his knack for giving otherwise mundane recordings a sense of depth, dimension, and vitality, musicians began flocking to his studio. Not only did Les Paul perform music, but he also shaped it. In order to add another layer of sound, he first recorded it on acetate discs and then played it back. Until the music matched his exact vision, he continued going back to step one. It wasn't simple. In fact, it took hundreds of attempts to get certain tunes just right. His Lover song stunned the music business in 1948. He performed each of the 8 guitar layers himself. Nothing had ever sounded like that. Columbia Records passed on it because they weren't sure what to do with it, but Capitol Records caught on to the idea, and the song ended up being a smashing success after its release. Paul wasn't only creating music in his garage, he was revolutionizing the music industry. Soon after, his methods would be widely used in the industry as the basis for multi-track recording. Both as an innovator and a performer, he left an indelible mark on the world. His 1945 recording with Bing Crosby of "It's Been a Long, Long Time" is a highlight. The song beautifully portrayed the sentiment of individuals meeting with loved ones after years of absence since the war had recently ended. Crosby's voice shone even brighter with Paul's nuanced and loving guitar work. The song didn't only hit #1 on the Billboard charts upon its debut, it remained there for weeks. Paul was more than a musician to Crosby. He was a trailblazer. He presented Paul with an AEX Model 200 in 1948, a genuine cutting-edge tape recorder, one of the earliest devices of its type to be sold commercially. In order to record more songs without destroying prior ones, Paul promptly disassembled and rebuilt it, adding an additional playback head. The music industry would never be the same after this groundbreaking experiment. Then, just as everything were starting to click, tragedy happened. The roadway became a sheet of glass during an ice storm when Paul was traveling through Oklahoma on January 13, 1948. Before crashing, his vehicle skidded. Both of his right arms were broken. The doctors informed him that amputation was their only option. The news couldn't have been worse for a guitarist, yet Paul still declined. Instead, he persuaded the doctors to permanently angle his arm so he could continue playing. Music was his life, and he was not going to give it up, no matter how terrible the option was. He was unable to play for nearly a year while he recovered, but he was able to think clearly again. While resting in a hospital bed, he planned new songs to record. He had been playing around with multi-track techniques previously, but now he could really give them the mental polish they needed before putting them into practice. Next, we have Mary Ford. She was born into a musical household and with a voice capable of elevating any tune. She met Les Paul, a guitarist who was already famous in 1945 through country singer Gene Autry. Not only was she a talented vocalist, but Les also saw in her the embodiment of his musical dreams. They began collaborating, and eventually their bond evolved into something deeper. Their private and public lives had become inseparable when they tied the knot in 1949. They peaked in the early 50s as a major musical force. They achieved 28 top 40 hits between the years 1950 and 1957. When it came to radio play, hits like How High the Moon and Vaya con Dios were at the top for weeks. They sold 6 million albums in 1951. At the time, no one had ever heard anything like their sound. Les didn't only play guitar, he used layers and manipulations to transform it into an almost symphonic piece. It wasn't as if Mary's voice were a tune. Rather, it was amplified, harmonized, and transformed into something greater than what any one singer could ever achieve in concert. Technology, not ability alone, was the key to their sound. In his pursuit of musical innovation, Les Paul was never one to rest on his laurels. He experimented with previously unseen sound effects, overdubbing, and tape speeds. He improvised recording facilities in their home, garage, and even a hotel room, rather than using expensive professional studios. He got Mary's voice to sound warm and personal by positioning the microphones near her mouth. In their New Jersey home, he carved out an echo chamber from the granite beneath their feet. The meticulous attention to detail ensures that their music sounds superior to all radio offerings in terms of fullness, richness, and technological sophistication. The studio wasn't the only place they had an impact. They made their television debut in 1953 with the 5-minute show Les Paul and Mary Ford at Home, which ran 5 days a week and featured their music. Not only that, but it gave an intimate glimpse into their life by seeing them performing music in the comfort of their own home. Watching two individuals who were more than simply stage partners and lifelong friends, in real life made the audience feel as though they were there too. Even before the term reality television was coined, it was already among the most primitive types of the genre. Among Les Paul's most remarkable creations was the Les Paul pulverizer. In an effort to bring the fullness of their records to life during live concerts, he devised a device that allowed him to trigger pre-recorded tracks while performing. Even though it was only the two of them on stage, it gave the impression that there was a complete band. The crowds were astounded since they couldn't have imagined that what they were hearing was anything other than live music. Modern technology was seamlessly integrated with live music. A watershed moment in the history of electric guitars occurred in 1952. Les Paul, a musician and innovator who had spent years experimenting with guitar design, linked up with Gibson, a well-regarded guitar maker. Les had previously constructed a solid-body prototype, which he dubbed the Log, which demonstrated that a guitar crafted from a singular piece of wood could generate a more precise. To be fully realized, though, his plan required the support of a significant corporation. And that's when Gibson stepped in. Gibson saw the need for a reaction as Fender's Telecaster started to gain popularity. They wanted to make a guitar that would rival Fender's and bear Les Paul's name, so they contacted him with the idea. Months of development later, the first Gibson Les Paul model was developed, with Les's active involvement in the design. Featuring a carved maple top and a sturdy mahogany body, it produced a deep, full sound with remarkable sustain. A gold finish was Les's suggestion since he wanted the guitar to be seen. The outcome was the legendary Gold Top, a guitar that exuded confidence in both its appearance and its tone. The initial shipment of 2 production versions to Les Paul occurred on May 20th, 1952. Just 1 month after that, he introduced the world to Gibson's latest creation by playing them live at New York's Paramount Theater. In July, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel hosted the formal launch. It was the start of something far greater than a product launch. The guitar was front and center at every performance that Les Paul and Mary Ford gave. It wasn't enough for Les to simply endorse it. He demonstrated its possibilities. From a financial standpoint, this arrangement was as revolutionary as any other time he played. Les Paul was the rightful owner of the patents for several aspects of the guitar's design, notably its distinctive wrap-over bridge, and he also got royalties for each instrument sold. However, the initial model had certain flaws. Ted McCarthy of Gibson created the first tailpiece, which hindered players' ability to readily bend strings. It was annoying to some. Gibson continued to refine the design over the subsequent years, eventually substituting a more sophisticated tunatic system for the original bridge. This seemingly insignificant adjustment allowed musicians to fine-tune their intonation in 1955. The guitar was hard to beat, even with its daring design and Les Paul's stamp of approval. Lighter, cheaper, and more aesthetically pleasing were the Telecaster and Stratocaster models made by Fender. The Les Paul, in the opinion of many guitarists, was too hefty and stale. Gibson chose to end production of the original single cutaway model in 1960 due to precipitous decline in sales. They redesigned it with a slimmer body and 2 cutaways dubbed the SG. Originally, they left the Les Paul name on it, but Les wasn't a fan. When 1963 rolled around, he finally got Gibson to take his name off the model. Something surprising occurred at the very moment that the original Les Paul appeared to be vanishing. A sunburst Les Paul standard began making appearances on stage by Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards in 1964. Guitarists from other bands took note. The guitar's robust, powerful tone quickly won over blues and rock artists like Eric Clapton, Mike Bloomfield, and John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers, who went on to use them in their iconic records. When Gibson saw the change, they took a risk and brought back the original Les Paul model in 1968. On this occasion, the guitar wasn't only an instrument, rather it represented the increasing influence of rock music. The Les Paul had already become an iconic instrument by the 1970s, thanks to players like Slash, Jimmy Page, and Pete Townshend. The once popular guitars are now among the most sought-after musical artifacts in history. What was once deemed a failure is now one of the most sought-after guitars of all time, with early examples from 1958 to 1960 fetching hundreds of thousands of dollars. In their prime, Les Paul and Mary Ford were an irreplaceable musical duo. Their marriage, though, was crumbling away from the spotlight. The couple's relationship, which began in 1949, became tense and traumatic in the early 1960s. Les Paul divorced Mary Ford in 1963, citing her infidelity as the reason. According to him, she was unfaithful to other men, including musician Foy Willing and contractor Donald Hatfield. He also said that she embarrassed him by publicly boasting about her romances and ignored their children. Tragedy and sadness befell what had begun as a musical love story. Les Paul stopped performing after his divorce. Mary Ford's death ended more than just his marriage. It also severed his musical relationship, and he never felt complete again. Additionally, he was aware that the music industry was undergoing a transformation. Rock and roll had supplanted his musical approach. He shifted his attention to invention, something he had always enjoyed, instead of attempting to compete with the new wave of artists. In addition to being a talented guitarist, Les Paul was also an innovator who was constantly looking for new methods to enhance sound. At this period, he invented the pulverizer, a tool that allowed artists to manipulate recorded sounds using their instruments. The groundwork for recording techniques that will influence contemporary music was created by his experimentation in the studio. He may not have been on stage, but he was nonetheless making waves in the business that nobody saw coming. His physical health was deteriorating even while he was developing innovative technologies. Playing guitar for so long had taken its toll. Now he had arthritis that restricted his finger movement and hearing loss that made it impossible for him to enjoy his favorite music. Many artists would have considered Les Paul's career over at that point. Nevertheless, it posed still another obstacle that might be overcome. In order to work around his disabilities, he adapted his playing style and learned new skills, which enabled him to continue creating music in his unique style. Despite his long absence from the spotlight, he was never truly gone. He collaborated with the famed guitarist Chad Atkins on the 1976 and 1978 albums Chester and Lester and Guitar Monsters, which served as a reminder of his talent and demonstrated, even in the absence of continuous concerts, why he was considered one of the finest musicians of all time. The late 1980s saw an unforeseen development. After a while, Les Paul decided to play live again. He was in his 70s at this point when most musicians' careers had already faded. However, he did not slow down. Rather, he began performing regularly at the Iridium Jazz Club in New York City. Even in 1995, his Monday night performances drew sold-out crowds. The guy who had irrevocably altered the course of music was seen by fans, fellow artists, and even famous people. He joined other music greats like Bob Dylan and the Beatles in receiving one of the industry's top accolades in 1988, induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. The wedding took place at New York City's Waldorf Astoria Hotel, and it was an amazing event. On stage, he was inducted by none other than Jeff Beck, widely regarded as one of the all-time great guitarists. Many were previously aware of this, but Beck finally came clean. Les Paul had a profound impact on Beck's playing, technique, and even his perspective on the guitar. A gesture of profound reverence, it served as a poignant reminder that Les Paul's influence extended well beyond the realm of music. Even after over 20 years had passed, he demonstrated that his impact was timeless. He received 2 Grammys in 2006 when he was 90 years old. In honor of his legacy, he released an album titled Les Paul and Friends, American-Made World Played, that featured performances by musicians like Sting, Jeff Beck, Eric Clapton, and Keith Richards. On that particular night, he took home 2 Grammys, one for Best Pop Instrumental Performance for Caravan, and another for Best Rock Instrumental Performance for '69 Freedom Special. It was astonishing to witness a guy who had influenced music for so long still taking home significant accolades, demonstrating that his sound had stood the test of time. His renown extended beyond the realm of music. He joined an exclusive group of individuals who have been recognized for their exceptional technical prowess and creative brilliance when he was elected to the National Inventors Hall of Fame in 2005. Everything changed when he contributed to music technology. His first solid-body electric guitar design, the Log, served as an early model for subsequent models, such as the legendary Gibson Les Paul. His innovations in multi-track recording revolutionized the music industry by giving musicians unprecedented control over the precise layering of several sounds. These were game-changing inventions that altered the whole industry, not merely incremental upgrades. Performing was something Les Paul did right up until the end of his life. He would play guitar and tell stories at the Iridium Jazz Club in New York City on a weekly basis. President George W. Bush presented him with the National Medal of Arts in 2007, further recognizing his immense impact on music and society. Les Paul Chasing Sound and similar documentaries chronicled his remarkable life and the ways in which his inquisitiveness and resolve influenced a whole musical movement. His passing at 94 years of age from pneumonia complications came on August 12, 2009, but his impact on history had already been made. Many famous musicians have paid respect to him. Slash said he was energetic and full of life, while U2's The Edge remarked that modern rock music couldn't have existed without him. Waukesha, Wisconsin, his hometown, is where he was laid to rest. Fans still pay tribute to him through displays like the Les Paul Experience. However, his impact continued long after his 2009 death. His collection of rare instruments, royalties from guitar sales, and innovative inventions added up to an inheritance worth tens of millions of dollars. What followed was a whirlwind of record-breaking auctions, arguments among his family, and court fights that have lasting effects on his reputation. Gibson was a major contributor to his wealth. He had an agreement that paid him $5 for each instrument sold when the first Les Paul guitar was produced in 1952. Although it may not seem like much, that amounts to around $60 for each instrument when adjusted for today's value. Time brought about changes to the pact. When Les Paul was stopped for a short time in the 1960s, things became tricky, but by the time he passed away, over 1 million Les Paul guitars had been sold. Some of the most priceless guitars ever made were made in the late 1950s. A 1959 Burst, in excellent condition, may fetch over $400,000. However, Les Paul's fortune was not derived just from guitars. His thoughts influenced the process of recording music. He pioneered the use of tape delay and multi-track recording, two innovations that opened up new possibilities for sound layering to musicians. Not only were these concepts groundbreaking, but they were also trademarked, making them expensive for businesses to use. Although the precise figures are not disclosed, these patents generated substantial revenue for many years. Next, there were the guitars that he hoarded. His private collection included artifacts from the annals of music. His most well-known creation was the Log, a solid-body electric guitar prototype he created in 1941. However, his Les Paul Gold Top from 1952 was the most valued. It was Les Paul's first mass-produced instrument, and he used it extensively in his 1950s television performances. Upon its eventual listing for sale, it completely disappointed. The asking price was $930,000, which is far above than the expected $100,000. The auction was only the first step. 4 years after he passed away in 2013, Christie's held an auction called The Exceptional Sale that included more than 150 things from his estate. Not only were guitars up for grabs, but so were early recording gear, experimental prototypes, scribbled lyrics, and more. Peter Green of Fleetwood Mac and Kirk Hammett of Metallica traded places with one another over a 1959 Les Paul, a piece that became famously known as Greenie, after Green sold it to Hammett for $2 million. Collectors would pay top dollar to get their hands on an artifact that had a past. Opinions differed. His controversial judgments as executor of the estate came from his son, Gene. There was widespread agreement that priceless historical guitars like the Gold Top belonged in a museum or with the original owners. Gene justified the sales by claiming that his father had a strong desire for his work to be shared with the public and not kept hidden away. There was further fighting after that. The royalties from Gibson were the source of the argument. While some preferred to divide the funds among themselves, others preferred to reinvest. When Gibson prevailed in a case against Heritage Guitars in 2021, establishing its trademark on the Les Paul body form, the matter became even more complex. There would be more money flowing in, but there would also be more arguments. Next, a dispute arose about his recording patents. Some were eager to license them aggressively and convert them into a reliable source of income, while others were reluctant for fear of damaging his innovative image. This is the incredible, intricate, and ever-changing legacy of Les Paul, a man whose dogged pursuit of invention revolutionized the music business and the processes involved in making and playing music.